Philosophy should help us pursue the good, the true, and the beautiful. All of us should try to integrate our intellect with our passions, our emotions. Man is a rational animal. We need logic. Yet that doesn't mean or entail that passions or emotions are not good things, because actually passions and emotions are good. However, they should be submitted to the intellect. That is our reasoning and logic. But just as the intellect can mislead us, and that's, by the way, why we need to study subjects like logic, our passions, our emotions can likewise mislead us. Howdy, I'm the amateur logician, and in this video we're going to borrow some classic imagery, both from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato and the amazing Christian author C.S. Lewis. We'll be classifying, categorizing emotions in a logical manner, and we'll preview how we can train the emotions to follow good, logical reasoning. If you're interested, please stick around. And visit my website, amateurlogician.com, for an extensive tutorial on traditional verbal-style logic. Now, it is obvious that man has emotions. We're not Vulcans from Star Trek, nor should we want to be. In any case, in traditional logic, there are three central acts of the mind when we're thinking about logic. And you can find such discussions in books like Socratic Logic by Peter Kreeft. Now, the first act of the mind is called simple apprehension. That's when we form ideas, universal concepts of things. We can form the idea of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a rectangle, what it is to be a tree, what is justice, or what is an emotion in an intellectual abstract sense. But passions, emotions, feelings are not ideas. They are not part of the first act of the mind. Now, the second act of the mind is called judgment. In judgment, we affirm or deny something within a proposition, where we have a subject and a predicate. But emotions are not these either. So the second act of the mind is not the same thing as emotions. Forming an argument is a third act of the mind, also known as reasoning. But feelings are not arguments. It's now become a cliché to say that facts don't care about your feelings, but likewise, feelings are not arguments. Even so, feelings are a part of our first-person point of view or subjective experience. Emotions influence us, clearly. That's why we sometimes see the word affection used for emotions. Indeed, the word emotion comes from the Latin verb that means to move. Emotions move us. Another older term used is appetite, as they are activated by things, which we often feel a positive or negative response to. So what about this imagery from Plato? So for Plato, the soul is like a chariot. We have two horses. One horse represents the lower appetites, also known as the concupiscible passions. People often reference eating, drinking, and sex. Yet these passions go beyond those things. Regardless, we can think of concupiscence in terms of longing for or coveting. When it comes to the basic human emotions, we can subdivide them into the concupiscible appetites and the irascible appetites. One horse represents the concupiscible appetites, the other one the irascible appetites. And when it comes to the concupiscible appetites, basic emotions tied into them include love and its logical contrary, hate, desire and its logical contrary, aversion, pleasure or joy and its logical contrary, pain or sorrow. For example, maybe both you and I are at a Walmart. We see some Cheetos as a snack. You and I get an emotional response, either a favorable or unfavorable emotional response. You desire it or perhaps are averse to it. Again, Plato's other horse represents spirit. These are also known as the irascible passions or irascible appetites. And we can think about various emotions connected to the irascible appetites. Such irascible passions include emotions like hope and despair, courage and fear, anger and sorrow. They are responses to a perceived good or evil that's difficult. Note that while emotions are not knowing powers, as we said, and they are not part of any logical act of the mind, the irascible passions are arguably and generally closer to the intellect in our ability to control them. My dislike or like of Cheetos, for example, is not very controllable. It is what it is. But pumping myself up to get ready to fight to defend my family, friends, and neighbors is obviously much more controllable. To reiterate, emotions are not knowing powers. Emotions can pull us, if we let them, in directions that can lead to our destruction. The emotions might lead me to become a drug addict or alcoholic. To rise above emotions, to control them, to harness them, is what man must do with his reason. It is precisely here that we come to the intellect in Plato's imagery. Any man should want to steer the horses, to control them. We can, so to speak, constantly push the pleasure button to our own death and destruction. That's why we need to develop good habits with the help of the intellect to avoid those destructive paths. Good reason comes first. Our will should always try to aim at what's objectively good. So will is aimed at goodness. Our intellect should always try to aim at what's objectively true. So the intellect points to truth. Alcoholism, for example, is something destructive to the good of our health and our intellect. It also can destroy our social relationships with others. Hence, it should be avoided. Alcoholism is an evil. It's not a good thing. So our intellect has to tell our body, so to speak, no if it's pulling us to overindulge. Now, before we dive deeper into categorizing emotions, let's now turn to C.S. Lewis. Now, The Abolition of Man is one of his most interesting books to read. There's many insights and themes we can pull from this short book. Now, from the beginning, Lewis points out that emotional states can be in harmony with reason or in disharmony with reason. We should emotionally like, so to speak, what is objectively good. One thing is for sure, we need to train the emotions. For without training the emotions, the intellect, our reason, and our logic won't be in control. We'll be slaves to our emotions. So don't be a slave to your emotions. Or think of it this way, true inner freedom is the ability to control those horses. Now, in his book, Lewis wrote about the head, chest, and stomach. The head represents reason. The chest represents spirit. It is that which disciplines the passions. The stomach represents the passions or appetites. Those are our base desires. And Lewis said that the chest is what bridges reason with appetite. The problem with much of modern society, Lewis thought, was that men weren't being raised with chests. Our education system and culture is failing to cultivate virtues or the training of emotions. Anyhow, even though emotions can help us go astray, they can also push us to do what is good. The emotion of pain can be a symptom of something wrong. Now let's start with the concupiscible passions or appetites. Sometimes traditional terminology can be confusing and potentially misleading. Think of love as meaning to like something. In a certain sense, love is the most basic of passions, or liking is the most basic of passions. It's the perceiving of some apparent good, an apprehended good. That is what we at least take to be a good for us. As an emotion, we're thinking about love as a sensual good, not an intellectual good. To like or love is clearly an emotion. However, reason can reveal to us that we can like or love wrong things. A man might love alcohol too much, for example. The reason thing to do is to judge what we love by the intellect. So we perceive something we like. We either have it or don't. If we don't have it, we desire it. Desire impels us to move towards the perceived apparent good. We want to be united, so to speak, with what we like, with what we love. Joy or pleasure is what we experience when we are so united. This joy or pleasure is linked with satisfaction. Note that joy, we might say, is higher than pleasure. It's a deeper pleasure at a spiritual or more intellectual level. Once again, the intellect can help us judge. Pleasure is a good, but to become a hedonist who only wants to feel pleasure is not a good. We also have negative concupiscible appetites, or passions. Instead of the traditional word hate, we can use the term dislike. Hate or dislike is an emotional response. It's not necessarily a bad response. For instance, we should hate genuine evils. We should dislike genuine evils. Regardless, hate is the contrary to love. They're logically opposite extremes. Aversion is a natural response to what we hate and don't have. That is, we move away. If I have a dislike of Cheetos, I don't want to move to grab them. But if I eat the Cheetos, I might then feel disgusted. I feel pain. Or if I'm dealing with a more spiritual lacking, then I might feel sorrow. Now, when it comes to the irascible appetite, irascible passion, we're dealing with difficult goods or bads. There might be a good we want, don't have yet, but is very difficult to obtain. Either we might feel hope if we have a belief that we can obtain the good, or despair if we have a belief we cannot get it. We're thinking about a difficult good that is absent. Hope is so important. We need to overcome difficult challenges. We act precisely because there's hope that a good end might be obtained. Hope is not just an attitude. It's something tied into a desire to obtain a difficult-to-reach end. It's a pushing, forceful hope. But like any emotion, it can be disordered. Somebody might have an irrational hope over something that cannot possibly be gotten, or it might be about something that is objectively not good for us. Despair is a negative, irascible passion. It's an emotive reaction to what seems hopeless. It's not a fun emotion, obviously, but there may be times that reason tells us that something cannot be reached by us at this moment, and it's best to move on. Emotions can always be rational or irrational. So despair can easily be irrational if we're giving up too soon. We might also be facing an evil. On the one hand, I might believe I can destroy that evil, and so I am feeling daring. So here the belief is that this evil I can fight against. I feel courage. Courage in this context means a power of the soul. It's not about the virtue of courage per se, but a kind of energy within oneself. It provides emotive support. It is an emotion. But on the other hand, I might just feel fear, where that evil is beyond my power. And maybe I feel both daring and fear at the same time in different degrees. Fear is about bad outcomes. It's about doubt. It's about the absence of confidence or assurance that things will be okay. Fear is not a fun emotion, but sometimes it is necessary. We need to be alert to dangers, for example. Another thing to consider is an evil that has taken a hold of us, so to speak. In response, someone might feel sorrow or anger. The sorrow is being submissive to that evil possessed. Anger is being resistant to that evil possessed. Anger is a complex emotion. Basically, anger is a response to an attack on what we perceive as a good. There's some kind of personal stake. Anger can be appropriate or not. It's not appropriate by the paranoid, and it can be totally out of proportion to the context of the situation. Nonetheless, there are times it is an appropriate response to a genuine evil. Even so, we have to be careful. It's easy to rationalize an anger that has gotten out of hand. On the other hand, someone might feel sorrow with the evil. They feel not resistant, but submissive to it. Now, this overview of emotions may be more or less common sense, but we should fortify that common sense. So how do we attempt to better ourselves with our emotions? That's obviously a very, very difficult question. I know I struggle with this. For the moment, I just want to provide a few simple starting points. And we can think about the virtues. When we're thinking about the concupiscible passions, we need to develop temperance. Practice abstaining to develop the virtue of temperance. This can help us with the concupiscible passions. Fast sometimes. Deny yourself sometimes. Let's discipline our appetite. Now, the psychologist and philosopher William James offered some really interesting good advice in his book, The Principles of Psychology. Keep the faculty of effort alive in you by a little gratuitous exercise every day. That is, be systematically heroic in little unnecessary points. Do every day or two something for no other reason than it's difficult, so that when the hour of dire need draws nigh, it may find you not unnerved and untrained to stand the test. Asceticism of this sort is like the insurance which a man pays on his house and goods. The tax does him no good at the time, and possibly may never bring him a return, but if the fire does come, his having paid it will be his salvation from ruin. So with the man who has daily insured himself to habits of concentrated attention, energetic volition, and self-denial in unnecessary things. He will stand like a tower when everything rocks around him. William James is actually a really interesting philosopher, not only a psychologist. For instance, he has this very famous book called The Variety of Religious Experiences, which I definitely recommend. So, temperaments will help perfect the concupiscible passions. But we also need to perfect the intellect with the virtue of prudence. We should study natural law philosophy when it comes to thinking about what is morally right and morally wrong. Prudence is basically about right action based on reason. So prudence goes with the intellect. Also, let's develop the virtue of justice by controlling the will. That means, in part, giving someone else his due. Will the good for other people. Emotions can make us selfish. Finally, we need to develop fortitude, courage, a real virtue of courage, to keep in harmony with the irascible passions. In this life, we need courage because there are many difficult goods that are required. Even intellectually speaking, it takes courage to go after what is true, especially in today's crazy and illogical, highly politicized culture. Standing for a more traditional education, indeed, takes courage because it is radically opposed to what passes for education today. So fortitude goes with the irascible passions. It also helps fight against anger because fortitude gives someone patience to persevere. And in that sense, it can help diminish anger. As I hope you can see, there is a genuine wisdom here. And a traditional education actually taught this stuff when you had to learn some grammar and logic and rhetoric and read some classics of Aristotle and so forth to see the connection between temperance controlling the concupiscible passions or fortitude with the irascible passions. There's a wisdom here, for sure. Now, I am the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. I'm sorry if this is not the best recording, but at least I try within my very tight time constraints. But if you enjoyed this video, please let me know. If you watched the entire thing, let me know in the comment section below. I would really appreciate that. Visit my website, amateurlogician.com, and I'll see you next time. Be well.